Good afternoon, and welcome to Raise the Bar, the Sky High and Fly Jump Camps podcast. I'm your host, Troy Haynes, and today I am lucky enough to have Kayla Bushey with me. She was recommended to me by my strong right arm, Barbara Bachaka, and so I approached her on Instagram, and she was very gracious and is here to spend some time with us. So welcome, Kayla.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being patient with scheduling. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
no, no. Hey, if there's anybody that understands that, it's me right now. This summer's been chaotic, but for an Olympic level athlete, I don't know, anything about that. So I had the dream of going, but never even made it to the trial. So,
Yeah,
it's
I got a chance to listen to a few of your other podcats and your story too about becoming a high jumper and going for Olympics. Was in the 80s?
yeah, long time ago.
The 60s. Okay. Well, but I'm in that position right now, so it's definitely Olympic hopeful, but it's
hmm
like not standard yet. So you totally get the story.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It's when I say back in my day, it's like back in my day, we used to have teeth, and it was so long ago back. But the trial height just kept going higher every year. Like my freshman year, I was terrible. In my sophomore year, I jumped 7.2. The Olympic trial height in 80, that happened to be Olympic year. So 84, the trial height, I believe, was 7.4 1/4, 7.4 1/2, which would be like 225. And I had just jumped 218. So, but that year I'd never even jumped 7 feet before. So
Man.
on my goal set starting that season, it was all about getting 7 feet for the first time. And then I knew that if I jumped 7.2, I had a handshake deal with the head coach that if I ever got 7.2, that I would get a scholarship. And so
Mhm.
that was more, what I was about that year. So when I jumped 7.2, I was like sitting in his office the next day going, give me some scholarship money. And it wasn't until towards the end of that year, as we're getting to the Pac-10s, that somebody said, you're only, a couple inches away from the Olympic trial height.
You're like,
And I was like,
huh?
oh, wow, really? Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, because it was not on my radar before then. So
Mhm.
88 and 92 were the 2 years that I really took shots at it. And, I trained really hard, had a great year in 88, real consistent, but I never even jumped any higher than I had in, 86 was my senior year when I jumped my highest. And I was more consistent, I would say, that year, but I never had a higher peak. And then
Yeah.
80 by 92, I was 28 years old. And I literally think Barb and I have talked about this a bunch of times, but I think I took about 5 years off my legs by overtraining when I was
Yeah.
younger. So, man, by 28, I was ready. I just did not like the weight room as much anymore. And, so yeah, it's challenging. And, I really feel for the younger athletes now, like yourself, that, the infrastructure over here in the US for athletes once they leave college is terrible, I think. I mean, there's just no
Yeah.
real roadmaps for you guys, because I remember going through it. I was like, I don't even know where to go. How do I get into meets?
Yes, and I didn't realize how much, well, I knew when I came out of college there wasn't an infrastructure. But I came from a Division 3 college, so I didn't even know what a D1 infrastructure looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from kind of play for fun kind of sports to, okay, I have this big goal. So it was kind of helpful because I didn't have any support in college.
Right.
So like we were taping our own ankles in college. And
Right.
so it kind of lent itself to being outside of college, taping your ankles again.
Yeah.
But I got a chance to meet a few athletes this year because I took like my first international training camps this year.
Right.
And wow, other countries have a lot of support
Yeah.
that I did not know existed. So
I think over here the thinking has always been, just survival of the fittest. We have so many athletes that the cream will rise to the top, and if they coddle us, maybe this is better for us or something. So if they don't coddle us, then it makes you tougher and all that stuff. But it's yeah, I find it, and I understand the huge big picture problems too, because it's a huge country. I mean, we have a huge country,
yeah,
and literally you have 50 little kingdoms all together, and they all have their own rules and regulations. And it's like I think sometimes I get real frustrated with USA Track and Field and AAU and all that, but it's like it's a big monster to try to, organize it all and to keep it going. I
Mhm.
mean, anybody that even tries to get into the Junior Olympics knows how crazy that is every year, because I can never figure it out. I'm going on their websites. I'm like, okay, where does it where do we start? Where do we go? How do we go through these steps? And it's just like, there's no clear roadmap. I'm just like, so, and that's just a small example, of the things you guys are going through. It sounds exciting though. You got to go to an international camp. Tell us about that. What was going on there?
Um, I so just to give you a little bit of background, I have been training post collegiately for 6 going into 7 years.
Right.
I kind of gave myself this timeline because I didn't originate as a track and field athlete. I was a volleyball player as a passion sport in high school. And then I got to college and I walked on the volleyball team. And then the track coach in college saw me, a little 5'4" middle. And
Right.
he's like, you should join track. I was like, and doing track was the first time I was like, oh, wow, the work I put in directly affects me. It's not
Mhm.
like a team sport. And so it felt really nice to put in work and see the direct result.
Right.
Um, and so when I graduated from college, like a few months before, I'm like, okay, I've got professors who are like, please go to graduate school. I've got my parents, please get a job. I'm like, I'm going to be a professional athlete.
Right.
With no marks. Because I was a heptathlete in college because I liked track so much. I wanted to explore all the events.
Right.
So I looked at like the Olympics list. I'm like, okay, what event at my height? I'm super cerebral. I'm very technical, and that's how I landed on triple jump.
Right.
And so I told myself, I'm going to give myself a real shot. I'm going to give myself 10 years because most times mastery is going to take around 10 years, whether you're 4 and at 14 you're going to Olympics, or you're 24 and then you're 34 and you go. So I'm
Right.
like, okay, I'm going to start at 22 and I'm going to give myself to 32. I'm 29 currently.
Right.
And so this was the first year. Well, I'm like enough years into training that I understood like the technical aspects. I know how to train myself in the weight room now. I know how to program. And I'm like,
Right.
I need to start exposing myself to other athletes, get used to going to international competitions because that's part of what I want to do.
Hmm.
And I hadn't really thought about doing Tenerife specifically. I was looking at going to Berlin the year previous, but with COVID, it was hard to go anywhere. But I got an opportunity to go meet a coach out in Tenerife because I coach myself. And he's like, would love to see how you work, see if we're a good fit. So I went out to Tenerife for a month. And whenever I do trips, like if I'm going to go to another state or another country, I try to give myself at least 3 to 4 weeks training there so I can actually get there, assimilate, train, and get something out of the training. I found that if
Right.
I only go for like a week, I just feel like trash.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So that's how I ended up in Tenerife. Me and the coach did not work out like 8 days into the trip.
Yeah.
Um, and so after that, I just stayed out there. And the beauty about being alone is that you meet, if you're open to it, you meet a ton of athletes, other people, trainers. But of
Right.
course, you have to go introduce yourself and say hi. So that was the trip to Tenerife, which was great because I was doing so much. I don't want to call it overtraining, but my life for the last 7 years has been solely focused on track and field.
Yeah.
So it's like I wake up, I check my heart rate variability, I track my macros. Am I sleeping for 8 or 9 hours? Do I feel better at 10 hours? Like, am I going to the pool twice a week, the sauna? Like, so regimented. I've got like 8 notebooks of every training day, what the temperature was outside. And going to Tenerife and seeing the athletes from Europe train gave me a whole new understanding of like, you have to enjoy your life still. And like, they could immediately tell I was American. They're like, oh, you're intense. I was like,
Right.
oh. And so since just Tenerife in, what was that, March of this year, I'm starting to restructure my life a bit so that I have more enjoyment. And so right now, I'm based in the Midwest.
Hmm.
Winters are just awful every year. It's beautiful during the summer, and then winter comes around and it's like, oh my God, it's terrible. So I looked at like a few places to move for some more balance in my life and to train in warm weather. And I landed on the Caribbean. So I'm going to move there next month and get my
Wow.
visa on Thursday, hopefully.
Wow.
And I'll move out August 8th and learn French and train and have a good time. So
I love it. Wow. That's pretty bold. Yeah. I was just thinking about what you're saying. I never even figured out how to get over to Europe. It was one of those things where maybe life experience and this and that. And I don't know. I was always kind of daunted by the task. If you'd hear like, oh yeah, you should go over to Europe and and jump over there. And as a college kid, and my parents had nobody ever even left the States. I was just like, I had no clue how to get that done. I, I might have a clue now, but I'm too old. But yeah, it's impressive, number one. And then excuse my complete ignorance, but where is Tenerife?
okay, so Tenerife is a part of the Canary Islands, and that is just like you can take an $18 plane ride to Morocco, which is in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a part of Spain, but it's an island. So you typically from the US, you would fly into Portugal, and then it's a 2-hour flight from Portugal into Tenerife.
Right.
Or you can take the scenic route like I did for less money and go to Iceland and
Nice.
then take a 5.5-hour plane ride from Iceland over into
It's
the
like
Caribbean.
that Walter Mitty movie, the Secret Life of Walter Mitty, where
That's a good movie.
isn't that
Yes.
great? Yeah. Oh, I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. Um, Completely different role for Ben Stiller for sure, because he was
Yes.
so just totally. I know people love this on podcasts and sports radio now when people go to mainstream movies, but my other one like that is like my favorite Will Ferrell movie, and everybody has their favorite stupid slapstick elf and whatever kind of for Will Ferrell, but mine is Stranger Than Fiction, because in Stranger Than Fiction he plays a completely normal person who is not goofy in any way and is just so almost uptight, straight laced. He's an accountant, and he starts hearing this voice in his head telling a story, and it's his life story. And it's totally off the beaten track. And that's why I like it so much, because I like the other ones too. Don't get me wrong. I love them, but it's like they usually do that, like almost every movie.
I, you started saying it, and I've definitely seen that one too. I'm like making a movie list right now because I feel like as athletes, you're either training or you're watching Netflix or a movie,
Right.
or you're working 40 hours a week.
Right.
I have to like rewatch that because it's been a long time. But
Yeah.
yeah.
It's definitely different. I call it a premise movie, and the
Wait,
premise
doesn't
is if you
can I
could.
ruin the movie for people? Doesn't he like die?
No. As a spoiler alert, he doesn't, but he's supposed to.
Like he's supposed to get hit
The
by a bus.
storyteller's trying to. Yes, the storyteller, which
Okay,
Thompson is trying to. She's writing his life story. She's writing a novel,
that's what it is. There's an
and he's
author.
living out the
Yeah.
novel. Yeah. So when she's doing her voiceovers and talking, and it's just the book being written, he hears her talking. And it's like Crick was taking and brushing his teeth, and he always did 76 strokes up and down and blah, blah, blah. And there's a couple times, and then she goes out of nowhere. It seems like he's totally oblivious. And she goes, little did he know that this would lead to his untimely death. And he's like, to his what? Wait, what? And he starts talking at the air like, who said that? Is it in my toothbrush? He's like, and he starts freaking out because he's about to die. He thinks he's about to die. So he goes to see Dustin Hoffman, who tells him, is a literature professor, and goes through this whole thing of trying to figure out who's writing this novel. And, is it a comedy or a tragedy? That's one of my favorite scenes. And then he goes to see Maggie Gyllenhaal because he's an IRS agent. She's being audited. And that's hilarious because she's a complete rebel and doesn't want to pay her taxes. And yeah, it's one of my favorites. It's completely different. But anyway, so we got off on a separate tack there. But that's, talking about that, Kayla, it's so true. It's like we have this thing as Americans, and I keep bringing it up on the podcast because here we are talking about raising the bar and how to get better and better, what we're doing, better training, better this, better that, sports psychology and supplementation. I have this gal on a little while back, Cynthia Monteleone. She's great. She's like a 47-year-old mother of 3 who just broke won some championship, and now she wants to become a decathlete or a heptathlete. She can do the pole vault. It's just driven, and we're this and we're that. And it's like, there's got to be balance too, like I
Yes.
think about that sometimes, like you said, it's like you can get kind of lost in the pursuit. And then, once it's done one way or the other, what do you do when you get there?
Like, it's so strange because you look up one day and you have a 10-year gap in your resume. You have no friends. You have really, I mean, some people can hold families, but as a female athlete, you're not getting pregnant. You're not looking towards kids yet. Like you're thinking about it later and you're like, wow, I've really put everything on hold to do something that I'm really passionate about. But I look at people from other countries and they have the support in order to do it, but they have life balance. Like they have families, they have interests, they have hobbies. They still drink alcohol sometimes. They go
Yeah.
out. They like, and I totally understand the pursuit of a world record. Um, I've just seen people take years off their life for a world record.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not opposed to it, but at the same time, I'm like, wow, it a lot of athletics, and I say athletics because I mean we're in track and field, but it's unhealthy, like some parts of it,
Sure.
because it's so extreme. And I think there's beauty in extreme discipline. I mean, both my parents are bodybuilders.
Right.
So I like different parts like that. But being 29 now instead of 22, and who knows what I'll think when I'm 39.
Yeah.
Um, but if I could talk back to 22-year-old Kayla, I'd be like, you still have to put in all this work. Um, and I mean, no doubt, if you're starting off post collegiately, you don't have a sponsor, you don't have support, you're going to be going to work. The first 4 or 5 years are just going to be rough.
Yeah.
Um, unless you like, I enjoy training. But if you don't enjoy the grind of training, it is going to be a long couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but a few things, like I remember hearing the statistic from USATF, they put things out to encourage athletes to train. And one was like, if you can make it past the first 2.5 years of training post collegiately, you're almost guaranteed to make it. Like most people can't make it past the first 2 years. It's
Yeah.
like the 2 year mark hits and it's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'd repeat that. I'm like, okay, 2.5 years. I'm like, we're way past that.
Right.
Like, let's keep going.
Awesome. Well, so let's back up because we kind of jumped into the middle of you in this pursuit, and like you said, it's been a journey from 22 on, but really you had no track and field experience in high school at all then, right? Then you're playing volleyball.
I had a little, I was one of those year-round athletes. I'm single mother raised. So it was like, please do a sport all the time. So you can come home at 6 p.m. instead of 3 p.m.
Right.
So I was always excited about volleyball season. And then when track season came around, I was like, oh man, I'm like, I hate running. I'm like, is there anything else I can do? So I started exploring the field events.
Right.
Um, but our head coach was a distance coach. He's wonderful, but he didn't know anything about jumps.
Yeah.
So he just put a shoe out in the sand and he's like, all right, jump to there. And that was the training for high school.
Right.
And then I'll let you cut back in. So yeah, that's the experience for high school.
Right. And so so you had a little bit there. So just triple, or did you long and triple in high school?
I ran repeat 400s in high school. I did triple, I did long jump, I did the 100 hurdles, which I was awful at. Um, and I've just always been somebody who wants to explore all the events. So
Right.
I tried discus. Oh, terrible.
That idea, since you like running, yeah.
I was like, let me just try to find something. And then when I got to college and the track coach had found me, he's like, what do you do? And I was like, I'm a jumper. I didn't even tell them I ran 400s. I didn't show them my 400 times. I'm like, I do not want to do 400s. So that's how I ended up in jumps first and then kind of explored into the heptathlon.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. I just recently had, and you may know the name more than I did, but Tony Holler is a coach at Illinois who is a legendary high school coach now, and he a few years back developed this philosophy that he calls feed the cats. And his feed the cat philosophy is that, well, first of all, to tell the backstory, he had a team that was loaded with great distance runners. And he was like, we're just going to destroy everybody and win the state meet. He was just like going, this is a no-brainer. I've got so many good distance guys. It's not even a contest. We're just going to kill everybody. And then when they got to the meet, it was like 105 degrees and all of his distance runners just wilted and didn't perform. And the team that won was a team that was loaded with sprinters. And he was looking at it. He's like, yep, sprinters work shorter. They can do more events. You know, it's very rare that you have a distance runner that does more than a couple. You know, you might have a really good distance runner go two, like a 4 and 8 guy, an 8 and a mile guy, you know, a mile, 2 mile guy, but never 4. And so you get your sprinters and they go 100, 200, 4x1, and possibly can run you a leg in the 4x4 or do a jump. So you get 4 events out of them, right? So his philosophy switched like overnight. He's like, I'm gonna start doing this. And he started thinking about how, and he had been a 400-meter runner in high school, and he hated it. He said he always hated running because they would run the 4 and the 5 and the 6, you know, the interval work and all this training, blah, blah, blah. And they would always be sore and stiff and tired. And it was just like, he hated it. And his new philosophy, this feed the cats idea, is that he goes, even his 400 and 800 meters, and I don't know if it extends past that, but he goes, they won't run anything more than a 200 in their workouts. And a lot of times his short sprinters will only do, you know, 30, 40 or 50 meter buildups, you know, to high speed. He's all about miles per hour. And he goes, you cannot run fast unless you're rested. You know, if you're tired and you're trying to get someone to run fast, they can't because they're tired. So he goes, you have to let them recover. And so he explained that. My brain went to like cheetahs, because when you watch a cheetah, they run 70 miles an hour. They're trying to hunt those antelopes, and antelopes are like keep changing track on them, and they're like, you know, got to slow down. Then they they skid out in the corners, and then they start catching up again, and they got to trip them, right? And then and nobody knows this about cheetahs, but they're not like the big cats. They can't just rip your throat out and then start eating you. Their jaws aren't big enough, so they actually bite in the neck and they strangle their victims, so that when they catch them, they have to wait. So that kind of starts the whole process anyway. So while they catch them, they sit there and they go, and they hyperventilate for like an hour, because the metabolic cost is so amazing to run 70 miles an hour that they're literally, if you said, here, you need to sprint again, they'd be like, I don't think so. You know, it's like, it's not going to happen, you know? So the whole idea is, and I love this philosophy because I'm a high jumper, and I was just like you. I hated running. I mean, I remember doing a 400 one time in deep part of my training, and I was like, why am I running a 400? I'm like, I'm never going to run 400 meters at the bar. It's never going to happen. I run 20 meters tops, you know, and I have kept that philosophy now for 30 years. I'm just like, you know what? The highest level I'll have my guys run maybe 150s and a few hundreds early on. And as the season's wearing on, it's 70s and 50s and 40s. And I just need speed. I need them to be as fast and as tall as possible. So anyway, that's my push for Tony's philosophy. And I find it interesting. I'm if you look him up, it's Holler, Holler. He's got a bunch of articles he's written, and he's got stuff out there on the internet, but he claims it's just a no-brainer, you know, as far as building a team. Now, maybe this is at the high school level, I don't know, but I'm willing to bet he's had quite a few higher level athletes working with him now that, you know, are aspiring to it, because I don't think anybody likes running when they're tired. I don't like running when I'm rested. So like, you know,
it's also like, what is your base? What did you do when you were a kid? Because if you're the type of kid who ran everywhere, you're going to feel comfortable running repeats, 2, 3s, 4s in the
right.
off season. But like my base being volleyball, I'm only taking 3 steps.
Exactly.
So like all of my base work, like when I think back to high school, I mean, high school lifting was like, oh, a joke.
Right.
But when I think back to high school or things where I'm like, okay, I'm not saying to stay in your comfort zone, but like how your body was raised over so many years. I feel like I've done seasons before where I'm like, oh my God, this is a canon event. This is like a TikTok trend right now, a canon event.
Right.
I one year was like, I am going to jump so far. I'm going to do the Dean Hayes, 10 by 200s Monday. 8x300s Tuesday. Friday was like 6x400.
Oh,
I was in such good shape. I couldn't jump because I'm a jumper. I'm not a 400-meter runner.
right,
So I had a beautiful running base that a triple jumper does not need. So
right.
like, I was
Yeah,
like, okay, that was mistake done. The next
yeah,
year, I was like, I'm gonna get an incredible base in the weight room. And so I moved all this heavy weight. I'm doing quarter squats at 580 pounds. I'm moving the weight slow.
yeah,
Mistake number two. I'm like, okay, great. I am a person who can lift a lot of weight, but I'm a triple jumper.
yeah,
And so this is like the first year where I am structuring my training to be specifically about a triple jumper.
yeah,
So we'll see how it goes. So if you talk to me in like, 12 months and we're preparing for Paris, then I'll say it worked out.
right. Yeah. Well, that's a real battle there. And, I got my degree in kinesiology from UCLA, and then I've got a master's in exercise science. And so I've had some good, grounding and everything. And one of the things that keeps coming out is specificity in training, right? So if you got to look at your event and go, or your sport or your event, and go, what is it that my sport requires of me? And as soon as you said volleyball, I said, number one, I'm always trying to recruit volleyball players and basketball players for jumpers, right? Because they jump all the time, and they might have an idea how to use their arms, and they may have some body control, and that would be nice to not have to start from scratch. But it's so funny because volleyball and basketball, sometimes to a surprising extent, the athletes don't know how to run, which is weird. But like you said, they only go 3 steps. And then
It
unless
took
there's a
me,
bad pass that you have to run for, like somebody hits a terrible pass, you run, try to save it. Maybe you see someone break into a sprint, but it's so rare. I mean, it's just short
yeah,
little bursts and sideways movements and all that kind of stuff. Like I see agility training is way more important for volleyball and even soccer, and to some extent even football players. The ones that have to change directions quickly, like defensive backs or wide receivers, right? Fast feet and lateral and all that kind of stuff. When we're dealing with track and field, man, we're running in straight lines fast. Like you think
yeah.
every event, the
And
only one with a slight curve are high jumpers and 200-meter runners.
when it comes to jumps, you're not running from, I hate to say from a deficit, but you're not like falling and catching up. You're
Right.
trying to create the sensation of falling every single step to
Yeah.
accelerate.
Yeah.
It's so precise
Yeah.
that it's not like Wreck-It Ralph. Like I used to run like this. It took
Yeah.
about four years to just learn how to
Like standing
relax.
north and south. Yeah.
And well, actually, like the whole idea of you run from your whole body, like your whole pelvic floor centers you, and you're actually pushing down through your quad, your hamstring is stopping your legs from falling out.
Right.
Like the whole fact that your whole body is this mechanism.
Yeah.
Because when someone said run, I was just running. I
Right.
wasn't like trying to think about applying force and having
Sure.
negative split coming through the last 10 meters,
Yeah.
So I totally get that.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like you said, sports, the specificity of training again for what are you trying to do? I mean, how long is your event? High jumpers go for 5 seconds, pole vault maybe twice that, depending on the length of the approach and how high they're going. For a triple jumper, from beginning to end, running down the runway and boom, 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 sand. Okay, how long is that? And when you
Exactly.
break that down, there's certain things that you go that this doesn't need to be part of the training, at all. And I think
But it's
sometimes
so
even, yeah,
it's dangerous too though, because like let's say you go super specific. That's
right.
when injuries happen too. Because like if you
Yes.
stay in specificity for 12 months,
No,
you
no,
have
yeah,
no
absolutely. Yeah.
generalization.
So the idea of the pyramid and the training and all that is that
Yeah.
you increase the intensity, you got to decrease the number of reps. And then we've been talking about this a lot lately here on Raise the Bar. And if you've just joined us for some reason in the middle, I'm talking with Kayla Bushey, and we're talking training now as she's getting ready to make a run towards the Olympics in 2024 in Paris. And we're all on board behind you. I'm excited. I'm going to keep following now and seeing what you're doing. Um, but as we're talking about this idea of, training, the thing that keeps coming to me, you're 29 now. I remember when I was 28 and I stopped lifting and I stopped running.
Mhm.
And I was still in pretty good shape, and stuff would come up. Yeah, you want to play some basketball? Yeah, sure. Go down to the gym. Somebody throws a breakaway, and I go up and grab and just, wham, just throw it down. And I'm like, man, my legs feel pretty good. And it was
Yes.
like, I literally do think I took about 5 years of life off my legs by lifting too much, too much base work and too much time of, repetitive overtraining. Like I always felt like if I wasn't lifting, I didn't have that same pop. I didn't,
Yeah.
that was kind of learned because in high school I didn't lift that hard at all, and I jumped okay. But when I got to UCLA, I put on 15 pounds like that. I went from
Well,
180 to
and
195, and
the
that was
collegiate system is get what they can get out of you. So
yeah,
4 or 5 years, get what they can get out of you. I don't know the D1 perspective.
right.
So it's all hearsay for me, but it's literally like I don't hear coaches in the collegiate world talk about longevity of the person beyond athletics within those 4 years.
Yeah,
So it's like, okay, it's national titles, it's conference champs, and if that means lifting 4 times a week all year long, that's what that is.
yeah,
And so you come out and you're like, wow, I'm tired. Like,
yeah. Well, I would go through year cycles. Like that first year that I jumped on 84, I remember I squatted 400 pounds full squats first time, 1 rep max, and
mhm.
went from 2 meters 10 to 218. So like 8 centimeter improvement, mostly the squats and hang cleans and that kind of stuff. I'm sure picked up some technique along the way, worked with 2 good jumpers there, but I was a lot stronger. And I remember, feeling, wow. But then the next year, when I came back to get in the weight room, I came walking into the weight room and I was kind of like, like I just
This,
knew. I'm like, if I want to do this again, I gotta really do it. And I lifted a little. I didn't have the same intensity. In my junior year, I didn't jump as well. So my
mhm.
senior year came around, and of course it's my senior year, so I lifted hard, and we really hit that year. I did what you were talking about earlier. I went, this is 1986 now, and plyometrics as a group were just starting to hit their big, start peak in the US of, oh wow, these are really cool. So it was like I heard about this, well, plyometrics, what are we doing with that? And, oh yeah, let's do this. And I mean, we did plyometrics coming out my ears. I was lifting heavy and, the same stuff I'd done 2 years before, but throw the plyos on top of that. And so I had a remarkable run in high school where I was always hurt, and I got to UCLA, and when I got stronger and strengthened up my shins and
Mhm.
got more flexible, I started not getting injured. I was never really injured from anything. And then all of a sudden, man, right at the end of my senior year, when the worst possible times, I just started jumping really well, hit my PR. I had qualified for nationals for the first time and everything else. I woke up one day and my knees all of a sudden went from feeling fine to feeling like I was 90 years old. And I was limping around on both my knees. I had tendonitis in both knees. And I was like, I go, what do I do? I mean, literally, I've got Pac-10s coming up in a week or two. And they're like, you need to rest. And I'm like, what do you mean rest?
No.
I can't rest now. And it was just like that. It's like, so I've done all those things. I've done the overtraining. I've done the wrong training. I've done, and like I said, there was no real roadmap. There's nobody
Yeah.
as the overall guiding guru, of my world, competitively for a while. And that's the thing that was always a little frustrating for me, in that, I wanted someone to do the thinking. Like I didn't want to be the one designing, all the stuff and trying to figure out what was good and what wasn't good. And, but I didn't realize all that time that might have been leading me to my other career, which may be the better one, is actually being a coach instead of being an athlete. So I don't know. I don't know how that works. So now, you said you thought you did the HEP and you checked that out, and then you gravitated towards a triple. So I was looking at your marks, the progression. You're now out to 12. What was it? 12. How?
1287.
1287, and you've got to get to 14 something.
Yeah, so it goes up every year. So Worlds this year, I believe, is 1455. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be somewhere in that range for the A standard. And with
Right.
it being the US, it's probably going to be closer to 1480.
Right.
Just
A lot of
because we have amazing female triple jumpers.
triple jumpers. Yeah. Well, the women's triple jump has really exploded in the last.
I mean, in 2016, it
Yeah.
was like if you were over 14 meters, you were something. And
Yeah.
now we're going into 2024, and it's going to be very close to 15 meters. Um, Depending if I have this conspiracy, I don't know if like when they redid the track at Eugene, the jumps have not been as far.
Really.
I don't know. At least on the runways, like long jump, women's long jump, men's long jump, triple,
Mhm.
triple. Unless I missed something, I just haven't seen anybody like super bounce. But I know that's after nationals for the collegiate athletes. I know it's a long season for the pros.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe it's something in there, and we'll see some big jumps coming up next
Yeah.
year. But
It's
yeah,
hard, it's hard. You're looking at it overall, even as a federation, or the Olympic Committee or whatever, like how do we get these marks out of these athletes? And a lot of times some of the top athletes on the team are coming straight out of the college mill, like you said, because it's way more organized and structured. I mean, let's face it, you can either try to string together in the US all these kind of random invitationals and all that, and then you've got
it's so tough. It is
yeah,
so tough to get a solid meet schedule.
yeah,
I'm gonna, as a post collegiate, like if you're a developmental athlete, oh my gosh. And then you're training on or you're competing on surfaces that just aren't even the same as like if
right,
you're a collegiate athlete. Because
yeah,
before I went to the 2020 nationals, I had never jumped on a raised runway.
hmm,
I didn't know what it felt like. I had never trained on one. So I was jumping great that year. I got on the raised runway and I couldn't jump because the only surfaces I had jumped on were cinder block.
yeah,
So I didn't know. It was like the trampoline, like when you miss the bounce.
yes,
Oh, so frustrating.
yeah,
But that's just experience and exposure. So it's like,
yeah.
okay, next thing, next thing.
I see both of those in my own experience too. Like when here in California, as a high schooler, I think my junior year I jumped 6'8", which I've told other people I go was nothing that year, and they laugh. They go 6'8" was nothing. I'm like, you got to understand, 6'8" in California that year, there were like the landscape in Southern California was littered with 7-footers. One of whom was Mike Powell, who was a long jumper and high jump
Fun.
in high
Yeah,
school.
like
He was
wow.
a teammate of mine, right, at UCLA. He was jumping 7'1" in high school. He had like a 42-inch vertical. He was an all CIF basketball player. And it was like, oh yeah. And he wasn't the only one. There was a ton of them. And so when I
Mhm.
jumped 6'8", it didn't even make any page anywhere. It was just like, that was enough to get you an invite to Arcadia. And then I was sitting around like a kid with an autograph book, walking up to Mike Powell going, could you, can I take a picture with you? I mean, I didn't even say anything. I was so starstruck. I'm just like, oh my God, this is such a cool meet to be at, and, you go from that, level at, 6'8" in high school. I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? They warned me about this. I'm starting to get Alzheimer's, I can tell. What were we talking about leading up to that? I got lost in the details of this.
You said it reminded you of something in your own career. I was talking about like the different
Oh,
surfaces
yes.
and like
Thank you. Not to cut you off, but now that I remember it, I got to get it out or I'll forget it. It'll run away. There's a comedian I heard one time who says, talk about me, talk about me. If you don't do it, I'll run away. I was like, okay. So you were talking about the trampoline effect on the board. So anyway, having jumped 6'8", the next year, which was my senior year, they invited me to the Sunkissed Invitational, which was an indoor meet. And the funny thing about that is there's no need for indoor meets in Southern California because the weather's so beautiful that they put us in this place. I don't even know where it is. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but we're inside. In high school, my run was 20 feet wide by 60 feet back. And this place had 11 feet or 12. And there was an inside track and then a 3-foot drop to concrete. So you're on this thing and it's like, I guess your approach is now 12 because there was 20.
yeah.
So I'm like, I'm running this super tight curve. I could not jump. I no-heighted. I wasn't in shape. I couldn't get any air. I just hated every bit of it. Right. So I'm like, this is weird. And then I went to see the flip side of that. One time we're playing at UCLA and I think I I think I was done, but I was still in school, and we were down playing a pickup game at Poly. Poly Pavilion's floors are outrageously perfect. So somebody, again, I'm playing basketball, somebody throws me a breakaway, and I went, grab the
You're
ball,
on.
dribble, and when I took off, I'm not kidding, my elbows went up over the rim. I was like, whoa. I'm like looking down like the Forrest Gump when his braces exploded and he's like, I can really run. It was like that. I was like, whoa, boom. And I was like, now that's what a good floor feels like. I'm like, dang, that was nice, And then I remember training really hard to get back to another indoor meet, like out of nowhere in my career. 2 years after college, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try indoors again. Wrong. It was the same thing. It was exactly the same.
Indoor
It was
is
so
a
horrible.
different sport than
Yeah.
outdoor track. Indoor track is so,
Oh,
and I mean, I'm glad you have indoor PBs and outdoor PBs. But that's one of those things, and that's one of those things like you can train anywhere, but where you train at some point in your career is going to matter. Because if you're
yes.
only training on poor surfaces, like it beats up your body.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can start training, like you said, specificity in training, if you can start training on the surfaces you're going to compete on at the bigger meets,
Yeah.
even within the jumps, like if I go to meets in the Midwest, there's not a women's 36-foot board, like 11-meter board. I have to
Yeah.
go off a 28 or a 32 because those are the collegiate choices here.
Right.
And sometimes the boards are sprayed or just painted. And all those things start to matter because when you get to the bigger meets and you're like, okay, I've never jumped off a plasticine board that has clay at the tip. I've never gone off 11-meter board, so my perception is completely different.
Yes.
Um, and I'm not used to having a drop of like 4 feet on either side with a raised runway.
Yeah.
All those little things, it's like, okay, this isn't even the same event now.
Right.
You're doing the same thing, but like exactly why tennis players play different on grass than they do on
Yeah.
clay.
Yeah.
It's different.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting you're talking about that because I've just been putting together and if there's anybody out there, please, that's listening to this, it's here in Southern California. I've had a brain bubble the last month or so, and a good friend of mine, Ed Wallace from Tesoro High School, he was talking about, we should do an indoor high jump meet, and I'm like a whole indoor meet. He's like, no, just the high jump. He goes, we got to find a place. I'm like, oh, you mean like get everybody indoors in tennis shoes, right? And he's like, yeah, get a good basketball court, bring the pits in. The only thing you got to really be careful about is the standards, those metal standards scraping up the floor or something. But if you can get everything set and then, just have everybody jump off of a really nice floor in their tennies, and I'm like, oh yeah, we should be able to do that, and I'm like, I just thought that would be great. I don't know anything because I see it from time to time when I see people train. Sometimes they're jumping indoors and they've got a place, and other times I'm like, that looks an awful lot like a basketball court. I'm like, and part of my brain goes, that would be fun, to do that. So anyway, that's on the list of to-dos in my brain, is to see if I can get a high quality, invite for an indoor high jump in tennis shoes with all the kids that are here in the Southland. So I keep throwing that out there. I gotta find a way to make that work. Even if I don't end up either getting any credit or any money for it, I think it would still be fun.
You have this podcast. You'll be like reference
Yeah,
this.
yeah, exactly. That's like I said, like if anybody's listening to it, I do a disservice to Barb, like I said, because the YouTube numbers are, nobody watches a podcast. They listen to it in their car. So, the listening is the better part. But so now for you, how do we get from where you are to where you want to go? You mentioned a lot of things that you're already doing, and you've got, your professional life, you've got your promotions of yourself, and then you've got your training and all that. But what's going to have to happen from where we are now to get you to the trials and then onto the team?
Yeah. Well, right now, because my only option is to do it by myself, there is a path to do it by myself that is possible, but my God, it is hard.
Yeah.
Um, And hopefully along the way there'll be more support, but it makes it easier in my head to just find a way and a plan that requires, I hate to say this, nobody else's help.
Right.
Um, just because I think if you start to plan it and you're like, okay, well, I need a sponsor at this point and I need a coach to be here for me and I need this. And it's like at some point you just have to figure out how to do it and the people who are supposed to gravitate towards you will come.
Yeah.
Um, so for this next year, I'll start, right, I mean, like I'm literally in my bedroom right now. This is my bed because I'm moving.
Right.
So I leave tomorrow to go because I got to get to my consulate visa appointment. I do not speak French, so that'll be a whole new thing to discover.
Right.
um, but that's my first big move is to actually train somewhere that is warm year round. So I
Yes.
can go out to the track every day
Yeah.
and it's not a question if I can train or not because it is so hard post collegiately to get on a meet an indoor track.
Yes.
You're not in college. It is like it's you almost have to work for the program or volunteer.
Yeah.
And the volunteer coaching positions, it's work. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
standing at a track meet for 14 hours, that's harder on your body than competing at the meet.
Yes. Yeah.
And people don't understand that. They're like, oh, why don't you just part-time coach? And I said, because if you're coaching, you're not being an athlete.
Right.
Your brain,
It's divided.
especially here, I did it. So I did it for 3 years and I had athletes calling me coach. And I'm like, just call me Kayla because you're like integrating into my brain that I'm a coach. And I'm like, I'm still competing as an
Yeah.
athlete.
Yeah.
Like, just call me Kayla. But so for this year, I'll start right now. I'm doing like a whole bunch of holistic training. So I have so much emotional baggage that I'm currently working on triggers.
Hmm.
I learned and took a like I'm learning how to dry needle myself. So I'm dry needling like the soles of my feet and hooking up the tens unit to make sure like my tendons are going to be prepared for jumping.
Right.
And then everything in the gym is right now it's almost no weight. It's
Explosively quick, super fast.
not even explosively quick. It's almost like isometric holds, like
Mm.
everything to just kind of get my muscles
Billionaire.
strong without
Yeah.
having to put a ton of weight on yet.
Yeah.
Um, so
I
that's
always
been
think
nice.
joint stability when you're doing ISOs. So
Exactly.
yeah.
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 Because everything in triple jump, like when you actually hit it, like same thing with high jump, how it's almost like your leg is almost the same as like a pole vault, the actual
Yes.
pole.
I use that all the
Same,
time. Straight leg.
yeah,
Keep that
same
leg
thing for
straight.
triple jump.
Yeah.
So I'm like, everything
Sure.
has to be stacked up.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure the tendons are ready because when I hit the ground and it moves, my God, it moves. When I hit it
Hmm.
and it doesn't move, oh, it's painful. So
Right.
like, I want to make sure everything's stacked because right now my left leg feels good. I've got like some, I have a bad habit of turning in my left foot when I jump because
Mm.
I'm a volleyball player. I used to be a volleyball player. So we always turn in our left foot as the outside hitter.
Yeah.
It is so hard to correct. So this year I'm correcting that so I can actually push through because it's almost better if my foot's a little bit out so
Hmm.
it still engages my hip. Otherwise,
Yes.
if it's in, it's out my glute and out my oblique and it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
So that's my left side. My right side, it just needs to get stronger because I'll take so many reps in training. I'm a left, left, right triple jumper that if I don't finish the reps, I still get the rep on the left leg. If I
Right.
don't finish the rep, I don't get it on the right leg. So
Right.
this year I'm going to be doing full triples from both my right leg and my left leg in training so
Hmm.
that I'm getting the same amount of contacts and starting to build up my right side.
That's smart.
Um, I'm going to be adding in long jump this year, which will be interesting because I've only ever long jumped from my left leg, but I want to
Or just to
really
train.
exactly. So it's going to be getting down the runway, getting, strength into the right leg. And it's not just about when people hear strength, they're like, oh, strong. But you understand this, but it's that quickness
Yeah.
and being strong in less than 0.05 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of reverb within your body. Um, and so surprisingly, it's super simple stuff. It's like doing a 15-minute yoga stretch routine at night. It's about making sure I'm actually like
Sleeping.
sleeping properly, exactly.
Yeah.
And then
You got to rest. The
yeah,
rest is sleep and rest. I mean, it's kind of both, but yeah.
yeah, and the interesting thing is it's also different when I'm in another country and I'm eating the food. I feel so much better. I could eat the same exact food in the US and I gain weight and I feel sluggish.
Right.
And I go to Europe, I go to the Caribbean. It's like I feel so much better. I'm like, oh my God. Like I
You're
think
in the
it's
wrong
insane.
country.
I'm leaving. So I will be back for nationals, but I'm gonna take a hiatus.
Right.
Um, So that's like, I mean, there's specific training objectives this year. There's always specific, like how long do you want your hop phase to be? Like how long are the training cycles going to be?
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken such a deep dive into the periodization of training
Yes.
that now it can get really simple because there's a time to get strong, there's a time to get fast, and there's a
Yeah.
time to combine them with technique. So
Are you doing
like
12-week cycles or are you doing more than that?
It just depends. So I used to do the cycles like really strictly, like, oh, I'm gonna do 4 week cycles on the last week of the cycle. I take a whole week off and do cross training throughout the week.
Right.
Um, and then I switched on the next year and I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep repeating the cycle until I actually get the objective instead of just doing the cycle because that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And now it's way more free form for me, which will be interesting to see how it plays out. But even the work that happens in the gym is based off of how the track session went. So, like, if I had a track session and I'm like, okay, my left glute feels really strong, my right glute feels like it's lagging. I'm not going to go in the gym and do 4x6 cable like kickbacks on both my left and my right. I'm going to do
More
fast ones with
week
folds
side.
on my right and more of them and less on my left so they can start to equal out.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's way more of like I'm starting to be a composer of my sport, like more of a musician rather than like a classical pianist who plays every note. I
Yeah.
actually just want to start listening to my body a bit more and my intuition and see where that goes.
Wow. Well, so many things, like you said, to think about the mastery of human performance. When I start and my athletes can tell you this, and anybody who talks to me would know this. If you looked on my Instagram right now and I go into my saved files, when I break down my save files, I had like nine. I think last year I had what I called 9 pillars of training, from
Mhm.
speed, agility, plyos, this, boom, boom, area, you know, joint stability, flexibility, recovery. Like, and sometimes it's kind of daunting, when I sit there and I go, there's all these things that I've learned that I think are beneficial. So how do I get them all in to the training sessions, and how do I spread them out so that I'm not doing any of them too much? So it's this real fine, interplay of all these things. And then it's like, I'm still trying to say, inside of all that, knowing all that, and knowing the propensity of both Americans and me to overtrain. How do I
Yeah.
how do I just every once in a while go, you know what? I just need less. Less is more. A good friend of mine, teammate, and kind of a semi-coach of mine for a couple of years at UCLA, Lee Balkin. He's a 7'3" jumper in high school, still holds the state meet record, meaning he jumped 7'3" at the state meet. And then that stood for since 1980. So it's almost been, wow, it's gonna be 43 years. So 44 years next year, because I know nobody did that this year. And Lee told me after he left UCLA, he would all of a sudden start jumping 7'6", 7'7". He jumped even higher. And I said, I had trained with him for 2 years. I said, what was the big difference? And he said, I trained less. He just said, I did less, not more, and I was
Yeah,
like,
do less better.
yeah,
Like,
just the volume, the volume. And I'm really, really trying to be aware of that right now. And as a triple jumper, I would think, I've coached the high, long, the triple, and the pole vault, and I was always more aware of the shin splints and everything for the triple jumper, because I'm just like, there's just so much more wear and tear, just sheer volume of everything, you know. And every once in a while I'll see one of those a post, because the other thing you'd know about me, not only do I have all my save files, but then I also have all the people that I follow generally are either an athlete, a trainer, a coach, a PT guy, you know, whatever it is that I'm interested in. So, you know, those are constantly coming by me on the stream. If I do happen to sit down for a few minutes and look at my Instagram, and then I'll see someone all of a sudden just do like repeat bounding all the way down the field, like just start running and go boom, 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 you know,
I have
strong leg
totally did
all the
that.
way down the field. And I'm
Yeah.
watching that just going, ow. I'm like, I'm start holding my
No,
shin in my
I
knee, you know?
think it is such a disservice to athletes, especially high school athletes, because I had shin splints in high school. I
Mm-hmm.
had shin splints in college. When I went to like a professional training group outside of college for a year and a half, I stopped having shin splints. The
Mm-hmm.
only time I'd have them is at the beginning of the season when we first started, because you take like a month or two off. And then if I got injured, so like if I got a heel bruise and so I'm landing more into my toe box,
Yeah.
I would have shin splints. And I just didn't understand that the way that you make contact with the ground will make or break your body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also like had started just doing the little things where it's like, okay, yes, we're going to start working out the muscles on the front of your shins with the little band exercises where you don't think it's going to do anything, but then you start doing them 3 times a week, just like you would how you warm up. And you're like, oh, my body has a little bit more capacity to take more load because
Yes.
it's not just like this muscle that can't like get
Right.
tight when it needs to.
Yeah.
Um, and the last thing was just proper shoe wear. Oh my gosh, how many triple jumpers do you see in high school wearing sprint spikes, triple jumping?
Yeah.
So many.
Yeah.
Like, how many athletes are going out and practicing starting in October in their spikes, jumping? I'm
Yeah.
like, why are you jumping in your spikes in October? I'm like,
Yeah. No point.
barefoot in the grass or be in your
Yeah.
trainers. Like
Yeah.
I
Barefoot in
so
the grass is interesting. Yeah. Just get back to that. Finish your thought though.
no, so I'm just saying, like, there's such a disservice to the younger athletes, and especially like when it comes to things that I post, I'm trying to help educate, but some of the mistakes you have to make yourself, and
Yeah.
you'll be like, okay, this is awful. Hopefully, this will get better, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really don't think athletes should have shin splints year round, even if they're triple jumping a full indoor and an outdoor season. I just like
Yeah.
there's you know
It's
something
definitely
something going
overtraining.
on in the train.
Yeah, it's an overtraining. Sometimes it's technique. I always tell people, I go, you know, bad technique is just going to destroy your body, because
Hmm.
there's a reason why you don't do it that way. But if you just decide you're going to power through it, it's going to do more damage in the long run. So if you can't change the technique, then it takes a toll. But then there's also just physical toll of training. It doesn't,
Hmm.
it could be perfectly good training and you still could end up with shin splints because you do too much, because that's the American way. The American way is if a
More
little is good, a lot more is better. And it's
better,
like
yeah.
we're starting to learn. No, I mean Lee Balkin told me that. No, my body told me that several times. I've told the story before, but my senior year in high school, um, I remember we went to our league finals and I had a twinge in my hamstring. You know,
Hmm.
I jumped 6'8", and on that jump, I felt something bite a little bit in my hamstring. And I told my coach, he goes, "Okay, we're done. You already won. We got CIF prelims next week."
You're like, no.
And he just, yeah, but he said, you know, all we're going to do next week is jog and you're going to stretch a little bit, but we'll do some back-overs, but there's no reason for you to do anything. You know, we got to heal you up. If you push it, you're going to get hurt. And so, you know, you could strain it even more. And so, yeah, took the week off, came back the next week and, you know, jumped 6'7" with no misses at CIF prelims. It was harder back in those days. Nowadays you could get in with like 6'2", but it was like, it was a piece of cake. And my body basically needed a week off. So I think what it did was it rebelled. And I think your bodies will do that for you. You athletes out there, your bodies will tell you, like if you're listening, my body said, you know what? He keeps pushing and we've just about had enough. So let's give him one of those. I was like, oh, dang. I'm like, ow, that really hurt. And I'm like, okay, wait, what? And then it's like, you're going to stop now. because if you continue to push, we're really going to rebel. So it's like, and I've had that happen. Most of the times I've taken time off, it's been because my body made me, not because I was smart enough to take the time off on my own. So, like you said, you have to go through some of those things. And I, unfortunately, I don't think I ever quite learned those lessons, but I have been able to pass them on, to those that I'm coaching, because I'm like, hey, there's no point in you training down to where you're in nubs, basically. You've worn everything to the bone. And I go, can you imagine you get to the biggest meet of the year? This is a term that I hope to coin someday in a book or an article. I call it razor dull. And razor dull is when you're like, what is the goal? The goal of using any cutting implement is to make it razor sharp, just sharp and perfect. And you do it. Well, what the problem is with us is we use it to cut, and then we go, God, this cut's great. I'm just going to use this a lot. And then you keep using it, and then you keep thinking, well, it's not cutting like it did, but it's still pretty good. So I'm just going to do it. And it's like razor dull, man. You just keep going at it, and it's like, no, the reason that it was sharp was because you sharpened it and you didn't overuse it, but you can't keep using it and expect it to stay sharp. So yeah, that happens a lot. And I go, you get to the biggest meets of the year, why would you want to be coming up? And you as a triple jumper, I'd imagine even more so, if you're running up to the board and going like this, this is going to hurt. That's never good. I don't care who you are. It's not good for performance.
Well, and I think one of the things is, especially as Americans, it's like, if we stop training, it mentally hurts. Like, it is like, I'm doing something wrong. Everybody else is training. I can't take time off. I'm slacking. I'm lazy. I'm not pushing myself.
Yeah.
And I think if we put a little bit more love for ourselves,
right,
and a little bit more focus into, I don't mean sports psychology, but I mean like actually like listening to the thoughts within our own head of like, oh, I really have an issue where if I don't train, I don't have identity because my identity is within my sport.
right.
So maybe I should address who I am so that I can fully compete to my potential. Because if you go pick up just a playful basketball game, you play so much better when you're just having a good time. And like, right. You're like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, versus like, this is the all-state game. We have to,
yes.
Do this. You don't see people doing fun throw down, incredible 360 dunks at the games that are really important. Right. It's always like a layup, it's this, it's that. And you lose a lot of the magic of sports.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we start to kind of come back into ourselves and be like, oh, I don't have to kill myself training today. I could go get in the pool, or I could go do this. And then all of a sudden you're enjoying yourself again. And you're like, oh, I'm actually enjoying jumping. I'm enjoying, I just hear so many athletes, especially in the US, who are like, I don't know what to do when I'm not training. Mm-hmm. I feel awful when I'm not actually on the path. Like, it's like we're so railroaded. Like, we have to be hitting every single objective.
Right.
And so for like youth athletes who are listening and people like that, it's like, you really just have to show up and relax a little. Because as an American, you're already going to have the drive. So show up, relax a little. It'll come together, Yeah. And that's why I keep telling people, I'm like, it just takes time. I'm like, you can make it happen in 2 years and your career is going to be over in 3. Or you can take the time to have it happen in 7 to 10 years, and maybe you'll have a 5 or 6 year career and actually get to enjoy traveling and going to these meets and,
Yeah. Well, and see the world too. Right. And then, I just find it so interesting because as soon as you did that, I go, I got a solution. So I'm like, I'm listening to you, and then I'm trying to plan what I'm going to say next. And I'm like, okay, she's almost done. I can almost say this idea. And then as I was waiting, I'm like, well, wait a minute, you're screwing it up anyway. Because I was thinking, well, on those in between days that are off days, you can do. I always tell my kids, I go, let's say you have a day, but you want to do some work. So I go, no weight room for you, no anything else. But if you want, you can do walkthroughs. I said, I love the idea of a walkthrough and a visualization because it's a free rep. it doesn't cost you anything. Now it does cost a little bit on the wear and tear and the brain side. So that's where my other side of me was saying, if you need a day off, it's almost better that it's like you're talking about, sometimes just a complete day off, go in the pool, do whatever, recovery, something
And
different completely,
have you had athletes that struggle mentally? Like they're great at training and they get to the meets and they just can't compete.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's crazy.
So for athletes who are on that track of things, I think a lot of the visualization needs to be in their personal life
Hmm.
or the things that upset them around the track meet. Because I was one of those athletes where I could train and train and train, and I get to meets and I'm like, wow. I'd get on the runway and I was almost exhausted because I had all these things that took 3% of my energy
Yeah.
and I just couldn't compete. And then when I started addressing a lot of like personal things I had, like I had it wasn't even picturing how to jump. It wasn't the technique of jumping or the run. It was the fact that six coaches that I admire were watching me jump, and that was taking some energy. So I had to start like going, okay, why is that something that freaks me out? And then I'd have to go
Yeah.
back into when I was a kid, I didn't even like it when my parents watched me play sports.
Right.
And then I had to think about that and I'm like, okay, that made me anxious. And then I was able to go back and piece it with something and
Right.
I could go to the next meet and it wouldn't bother me. So I think for some athletes, it's like we have all these personal issues.
Yeah.
And if we could just start visualizing through some of those or connecting some of those, we'd be so much lighter to compete. Because the
Mhm.
first time I actually wrote down the list of everything that bothers me at a track meet, because it ranged from like, I didn't like it when people clapped when I was on the runway because I trained by myself. So I trained in silence. So
Yeah.
when I got to meet and people are clapping, I was like, oh, you're throwing off my steps. Like,
Right.
and I wrote the first list and I had 47 things that
Wow.
bothered me going to track meets. And I'm like, no wonder why I can't compete
Yeah.
because I'm being weighed down by 47 different things. Um, and so I think like if athletes could start to address maybe just writing down things that bother them rather than just focusing on the technique,
Right.
they would realize that they are enjoying themselves at the meets now, you know?
Yeah. Wow. That's a interesting thought. We've gone into the realm of sports psychology just a little bit. One of my previous, just the last couple guests, Coach Dev was on, and he was talking about how he's a motivator, so he's always trying to motivate his kids. And he said, paradoxically, he really likes to use positive motivation with them, but he found he was better when he thought somebody was either talking trash about him or saying something. Like he would tell his coach to, when he came up and would be like, what was your first jump like, the coach would just be like, like it was crap. And even if it wasn't, because he did better with that.
Yeah.
But he really does try to use the other side of that with his own athletes, which I found interesting. But we're taking the lid off Pandora's box there of, the workings of the mind. I mean, I'm getting ready to write several books, one of which is I call technique coaching in the high jump. The Goldilocks and the Three Bears teaches the high jump, because so many things I found are not to the left and they're not to the right. They're right in the middle. It's like
That's right.
from, teaching someone about arm swings. I'm like, okay, why do we tell you 90 degrees? I'm like, because if your arms are straight and you swing them, that takes too long. And if your arms are bent right here, that's too short. Like, it's right in the middle. And then you find so many times where that still holds true that I almost laugh about it. But then my more recent thing in these last 2 or 3 years of really trying to teach, and one of the things that I found interesting is the contrast, and you might find this as well, Kayla, the contrast between a single armor and a double armor. And you and I both know that when it comes to the triple jump, man, there are some wild divergences in technique. Most people watching it from just the ground level that don't know anything about the triple are like, okay, what in the hell are they doing? Why are they jumping 2 times on one leg and on the other? And they're like, okay, wait, what's the pattern? Like, you can't see it. It's happening so fast, it just looks confusing. But when you watch it slow motion, there's the gather and double arm traditional power, with both arms. And then I've seen, the European, what I call the European singles, where they just go through. And then I've seen some weird arms going around and all these different things. But when it comes down to it, you watch and you go, are people hitting over 50 feet, over 55 feet with the men doing this? And if you can find an example of all three of those techniques that we just mentioned where that works, in my mind, you have to say that's a legitimate technique. And if you see it for the women and you go, hey, double armors and single armors and windmillers or whatever the heck they're doing, if they're out there 45 or 47, like you're saying, you're like, hey, that's a qualifying mark. That's legit. It works, right? And so I'm doing the same thing with the single arm. Like when I was in college, I hated the European single because I'm an American. I would gather my arms and then power up with a double arm blast off, and with now, as I've gotten older and I've been studying more and more, I think everything's moving towards speed, but I'm like, man, it looks like an advantage to me to make yourself taller by getting this arm up. And I started remembering watching Dr. J and, other basketball players dunk from the free throw line. They can't use both arms because one of their arms is holding onto a ball. I've never seen anybody try to dunk from the free throw line with two hands. So they're just running and they palm the ball because they're giants. People don't know how big these people are that are 6'6" and have huge hands, and they just reach down and pick up the ball like it's a baseball. But they're running down, they dribble, catch, and then lift off with that one hand up, and they didn't even use it to jump. They're just jumping with the other arm. And I'm like,
a basketball player doing that over a long jumper, it's almost the same movement.
yeah,
Oh my God. The free leg, the
yeah,
stiff leg, the hips roll over, the arm
yeah,
comes up, the knee comes above 90 and it
yeah.
hangs. Ah, it's beautiful.
It is. But the thing is, for me, teaching that, I have found, especially, it's easiest right now when I get them when they don't know what they're doing, because then I can just watch them and I'll be like, okay, let's try this. And I might try a double arm with them. And it's always easy for me to show the double arm, but I've been really trying to push myself towards training people to do the single because I kind of like it better now. So I'm like, okay, make sure you get this arm up. But it's like, man, teaching someone something when it's new is one thing, because there's so many little things I got to remember. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to train them to not look at the bar, because I think the bar is one of the worst things to look at in a high jump, because it's like a moth flinging itself against the light. And I think
Well, what you look at, you
they
hit.
go there. Yeah, exactly. They're looking at it, so they go at it. And I'm like, no, don't look at the bar. Look over there. So you come up and you jump, and you come over and your body turns, and then you'll pick up the bar. And I'm like, I like the bar for layout. I don't like it for takeoff. But so I start thinking of all these things I got to teach them. But what I've been finding out that's amazing to me is how the brain learns technique. And when, as athletes, like if you tell someone to run, most people will have run since they were 1 year old. So they will start doing things. And I go, this is why I like the single over the double for so many reasons now. And I go, it's just easier. And what I mean by easier is your arms have been doing this forever and a day. And when you say to one arm, stop here and wait for this one to catch up, and then start going together like this, your brain just says on one side of the court, it just says, what? It's like, no, we don't do that. I'm like, your brain loves patterns that it can repeat. It's like when I say start walking here, you don't go, okay, wait, how does that work again? Left arm, left leg at the same time, right arm. No. It's like, oh yeah. Okay. No, that pattern's in there. It's tried and true. It's like when you're on a computer and you go, what should I open up next on a spreadsheet or whatever? And it goes, well, do you want this one? Because this is what you opened up yesterday. Or maybe this one. This is what you did 2 times ago, right? It has a real common list. I think our brains work the same way. It's going to go right back to the most common thing.
Well, and that's why you get a lot of high jumpers who transition really well over to triple as double arm, because they've done this loading and then they can come into triple and do the loading.
Yes.
And those people are standout. I mean, you have Christian Taylor who did that. You have Katarina Bargun. She did that. You have a lot of heptathletes who go into triple. They've experienced high jump before. But what you'll see, and this when you look at different techniques, it's like, okay, what have you done in the past that you're comfortable with? Because you have, those patterns. And then how much brain plasticity does your athlete have?
Yeah.
Like, is your athlete able to connect new things? Like, do they like boxing? Can they think of punching their fist instead of swinging their arm?
Right.
Can they, yeah, do they have like the same symmetry on both sides? Do they have a previous injury in their left ankle? So they limp, so their left leg isn't as strong, and so they
Right.
can't move their right hand as fast. And that's why I found it really difficult to coach more than 7 athletes. That even was a lot for me because I was coaching myself and I coached for a few years at
Right.
a college. And I'm like, I don't know how these coaches are doing high school programs with 40 athletes who are all doing one event, because I'm
They're
like,
all
you're not,
different. Yeah.
oh my God, it's so hard to coach the individual athlete. You really have to coach the program and
Yes.
have a system versus like, okay, we are going to see how you move, because they
Yeah.
all need that baseline, which everyone needs. But for triple jump with the arms, I mean, I jumped with no arms in college because I didn't know what
Right.
I was doing. And then I am a single double double. So I single through the board.
Like a
Um,
long jump takeoff.
Not quite, because I'm not going forward, because in the triple I'm going through and up.
Okay.
So it's either a shoulder shrug, so just pop there and then it comes around,
Okay.
or it's a physical punch off the board. So here you punch and then you double, double. And
Yeah.
I've done double off the board before. And when I can do double off the board, I have so much more length and power, but the timing is just hard to get.
Yeah.
Because if I stand in front of I don't know, a 50-inch box, I'm not going to single arm jump onto that box. I'm going to double arm because I have more power to
Right.
get up there. So if I can time up the speed with the double, it's
Yeah.
just, it takes longer. So you have to
Right.
punch it. And like you said, you just have to keep repeating that pattern. So I'll have a year that's really good. Like, oh, I'm technically sound. Like I can get through this. And then some years my brain is like, how did we do that?
Right. Well, this may interest you. I've been teaching this last year. I've started, and I know I've taught it before, but it's a new way of trying to get it through the kids. But it's like in the high jump, for instance, I tell them, you guys are a little bit more complex than the long jumpers and the triple jumpers in one simple thing. Long jumpers and triple jumpers are going north and south. They're running in a straight line. They do not lean to their left or to their right as a rule, because we're running in a straight line. So I go, basketball players and volleyball players are very similar. They very rarely run little curves. They run short, straight lines, and then they go up. What do you have to do to maximize your flight, like you're talking about, is I need to lean back at least a little, right? So long and triple jumpers both will be leaning back a little bit at takeoff, not as much as a high jumper, but they still need to be back a little so that they can get some air, right? If I'm too vertical or even a little bit past vertical, now I'm in danger of doing a front flip. So I've
I
got to
think
get that
I
leg
think
out in
you
front of me.
can do it. If you
Yeah.
not I try not to lean back. When I'm coming through the board, I almost want to be through the board and strike it negatively so that my
Mhm.
hips are already a foot past the board. So I already have a foot of distance covered.
Right.
And then as you come through the hop, I'm pushing my hips through so I can come up into line. But anytime that I try to come back, like lean a little bit back on the board, it pushes my hips forward almost like I'm long jumping, and I get this huge first phase instead of
Right.
this flat. But it is so hard to do. Like when you're coming through that fast and you're not leaning back, because the leaning back slows you down just a little bit.
Sure.
So it's like if you've built up all this speed in 30 meters to come to the board to just slow down a little bit, it's like, what was the point of the 30 meters, right?
Agreed. And then you're like,
So
you're getting height, and then you're in danger of collapsing on your second phase.
exactly. So it's almost like, okay, instead of leaning back, I would rather be a little bit forward, even though it's a little harder. It means you have to push longer through the board so your hips come through in the hop phase.
Uh-huh.
And the other thing is you have to, whatever speed you're running, right, through the board, your foot and your knee have to rip through twice as fast because you have to accelerate through the board.
Yeah.
So the fastest part of my runway, and I know I get into arguments with people about this because some coaches will be like, okay, you need to be at your fastest point 10 meters before the board and maintain speed through the last 10 so you can jump.
Hmm.
My fastest point in my run is when my foot hits the ground at the end of the hop. So
Hmm.
that means I accelerated all the way through the hop, and now I can accelerate through the step. And most likely I'm going to decelerate through the jump phase. You only
Sure.
have like the all-time greats who actually, because
Con-
people think it
Continue
doesn't
to
exist.
accelerate. Yeah.
Exactly. People think it doesn't exist, but you have people like Jonathan Edwards who's proven that you can accelerate through the phases.
Yes.
Um, and then you have people who've proven that they are just strong enough
Sure.
to decelerate and still get the same distance.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I'm so sorry. My brain just like was like, wait, you don't have to lean back.
Oh no, not at all. I'm not
But
saying that as like I'm an expert in triple jump technique. I was
no,
talking
no, not at
about
all.
the
I was just
like
thinking about
yeah,
the differences and the similarities.
sure. But you were talking about getting up onto a box, right? And so I was saying, well, anytime somebody wants to get air, usually you'll get that little tilt back, and then I,
Hmm.
pop my knee up, and then the other thing I tell my jumpers is that if your upper body's in the way of your knee drive, then you're in trouble. That's why I'm always trying to get them to stay more vertical. As they get
Hmm.
over, I'm like, that doesn't work for me. I go, and I so many times with the high jumpers, I go, look, I like speed, but I don't want you forward. They've got to be back in the high jump, especially because we're working in 2 dimensions. That is where we started. So I've been
Hmm.
teaching them to get the idea of leaning back and going step, step, but lean back and then get air like they're going to jump up and touch the rim.
Hmm.
But I said, when you're running a curve, the curve is lending itself to an extra sling. It's kind of a slingshot effect because simply because you're leaning away from the bar when your foot hits. If you're leaning away, if you manage to stay there, you're going to get a natural little catapult that has nothing to do with your jumping ability. It has everything to do with the fact that you were leaning when you got your foot on the ground and then you go up from there. And I said the amount of catapult force depends on how fast you're running and how much you're leaning. So, I'm showing them both of those things, but I've found it easier to teach it on, like you're saying, like a long jump takeoff where they're leaning back, a
Hmm.
little bit so that they can get, that up and around and then continue to carry, continue running through the air and all that kind of stuff. Or I have fun with the long jump too, because again, I show people, I go, everybody wants to hitch. And I'm like, there's some really good jumpers that don't hitch. That's all I say. I go,
Yes.
there's some outrageously good jumpers that don't hitch at all. There's some really what I call hot pop and pullers out there. And there's some chair sitters, that are amazing. And you're like, how can they do that? I'm like, I don't know. But if everybody was the
Stay
same, it would be
in
really
the
boring.
air.
Yeah. That's the one thing that's fascinating to me is that everybody's different, and even when you get into the pole vault, you're thinking, well, everybody runs in, sticks the pole up, they got to invert, swing up and do this and that. I'm like, yeah, but there's guys that have different theories on, what do they do at the plant? Does that, does this happen here? Do they pull down on the pole? It's like, it's every time you think it's got to be like this. That's why I tell people, I go, I don't have a system. Like when the kids come to me, I go, hey, man, double arm gather. This was it. This worked for me. I jumped 7.3 this way. You go double arm pump. I said, if you jump 7.3 in high school, you can go on and change to something else. But it's like, I don't do that to them because I know that there are at least what I call 5 categories of arm preparations for high jumping with a lot of subgroups. Because I've gone through and looked at it in a film where I'm like, wow. I go, I don't think I've ever seen that before. And then I'll be like, how
Mhm.
is this guy jumping 7.5? I'm like, dang it, that's another one. It's like, it's like writing it all down. It's kind of crazy. I saw this one kid 2 years ago now, not this year's Mount Sac, but the year before. The men's high jump was really good. There's a kid from USC who jumped 7.6, and another guy that had graduated from Texas Tech who jumped 5.5. And the 5.5 guy, I can't remember his name, but he was a foot scraper. And I tell
Mm.
people, I've told people for years, I said, I don't think that there's a foot scraper out there that can jump over 7.4. And then
Mm.
I had to make a note to myself, once again, wrong, because this guy jumped 5.5 and he scraped his foot at takeoff. Now, what I said immediately was, yes, he may have jumped 5.5, but I said, I believe he could jump higher if he wasn't scraping his foot.
Yes.
But, I'm like, you jumped 5.5, what are you going to say? So there's all kinds of different ways, to get through it.
I mean, it's even interesting to look at the Paralympic athletes because I got a chance to meet a few of them this year.
Yeah.
And There are people who have one arm and one leg, and we're talking about a double arm, and they don't have that,
Yeah.
privilege to have both appendages jumping, you know what I mean? Just as high as some of the D1 levels. So it's like, okay, there are tons of different ways to do it. It's just like
Yeah.
what works best with your body.
Oh, it's amazing. I've had a couple of those come across, some of those amazing athletes come across my feed from guys standing there with their crutches, and then they throw them down and they're hopping on one leg and they go up and do what they do.
Clearing.
And I'm
Yes.
like, that's amazing. And then there's another guy who's got the prosthetic in there and he's running and he does. I've seen one guy with one leg looks long and the other one's got a really distinct club foot, and one leg looks twice as long as the other, and he's
And
running
still
and jumping
bouncing,
and
right?
still has pop, and I'm just like,
Yes.
wow, that's amazing, and and then again, here we are, we deal with athletes that have all their everything, and they've got all these problems. They can't jump. Like, wait,
I know, between here.
yeah, yeah, you think you got problems? This guy's got all these problems, and he's just mentally off the charts tough.
Yes.
He can just get it done. Well, hey, Kayla, I would keep talking to you for another hour, but I'm sure you have a life that you have to get to, and
Yes, I need to
we're creeping
continue
into right.
packing.
It's been lovely talking with you. You are a treat, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. Best of luck. I want to follow everything that you're doing. I think you would be. I've talked with Barbara about this too, and it would be great if we could get a reality, camera on you as you're going through your day, because there's so many things working there that I'm appreciating the levels of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and completely on your own, which I still think is amazing. And I'm hoping that someone will come along that you can find to trust to help you, and even if it's not from a coaching standpoint, maybe as a mentor or a confidant, or it sounds like you're doing a lot of the the planning and the thinking. Like I said, I got to that place too, and I've done both. I've done it as the coach, and I remember, I think as an athlete, I would have liked to have had somebody do that for me, just to remove one level of that intensity. But an awesome undertaking that you're there, and I'm your biggest fan. I can't wait
Thank you.
to see what happens, because it's exciting. So let us know when you're competing. Send videos. I will shamelessly promote you and show
If you
all
if
your
you
dunks.
are willing to promote something, I'm currently working on an ebook for athletes. It's called What Coach Never Told You. So it's all the mistakes and things I've learned over the last 7 years. And that, I don't know when this podcast goes out, but that'll be available in September of this year.
Okay, hopefully we'll get it done before September. Barb's been moving faster. She's turned Sundays into podcast Sunday, so we've got a backlog, but they're starting to come out every Sunday. So, but I know, like I said, she's a big fan of yours, so we'll make sure that we get that.
Yeah, and I was gonna say,
Up
if
in
you have
front.
people who specifically listen, I'm happy to make a coupon code or whatever.
Oh, great! Yeah,
Oh,
that'd be
I don't know.
awesome.
We have to think of a name. Maybe it could just be called Raise the Bar, and give them in the coupon a percentage off for
There you go.
listening.
All right, sounds great. And that's a must read, I'm sure, because there's yeah, I think about that sometimes. I get back to my career at UCLA, and I loved everything about being a Bruin, the training facilities, the athletes that I met in my time there, just amazing, and amazing coaches that I feel so blessed to have been under. And at the same time, there's times I'm just like going, did they tell you that when you got to UCLA that there wasn't going to be a high jump coach there? It was like I went through 2 years with no high jump coach, and where I was being trained by the other two jumpers. So like you said, those things that either the institution themselves don't tell you, or yeah, your coach didn't tell you. I like the sound of it already. All right, Kayla. Well, it's again been a pleasure, and we'll keep the lines of communication open. Let me know what I need to do. Just send me a DM, and we'll get it done.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time. I had a great time.
Oh, me too. It was a real pleasure. All right. Well, best of luck. Stay healthy, and remember to do all those things that we talked about. You got a lot of
Yes.
people to cover. And then good luck with the move and all that, and good weather and training and all that. When is just so we know, when's the next time you're going to be competing? Do you have some kind of an indoor planned, or are you just going to, what do you?
Well, I'm gonna see how my body adapts to the training being outside year round, but because it's the Caribbean, we'll have opening meets that are 80, 90 degrees in December. So
Yeah, right, right. Yeah.
it'd be a good time. So I think I'll do, well, I guess I'm telling everybody. Usually I do one or two meets at the beginning of the year and I don't tell anybody just to
Hmm.
kind of see where I'm at. It kind of takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm feeling more confident in sharing.
Good.
So in December, I'll do a meet or two, and then I'll have to see because I'll be in a different part of the world. You've got Guadeloupe and you have St. Lucia, and see what meets are around there. You're only like
Yeah.
an hour. And put together a meet schedule that makes sense. So
Yeah. All right. Sounds great. Can't wait to see some results. Send videos. I will shamelessly promote. Like I said,
okay, I
be,
will.
be an honor to do so. All right,
Thank
Kayla.
you.
All
Have a
right.
nice
God
day.
bless you. Thanks so much. All right. We are stopping and ending.
Awesome.
And that's going to wrap it up here on Raise the Bar. Another episode is in the bag. We were really, really lucky to have Kayla Bushey with us today. She's an American triple jumper. She has Olympic aspirations coming up in 2024. She would love to make the U.S. Olympic team going to Paris, and is taking control of her own career. She's moving to the Caribbean to train because she hates the Midwest in the winter. Um, and this being, she's 29, she said this year. So, at least 29 as we get to the Olympics next year, maybe even 30. And, she's got a long road ahead of her, but she's very smart and she's done a lot of research and she's out there making it happen. And I have the utmost respect that she's going to another country, that she's made some of these international meets and all that kind of stuff all on her own. And hey, just keep her in mind as you're looking for those results every week. And like I said, we're gonna shamelessly promote her new ebook on things that your coach didn't tell you, and all that. So look for those things coming up. We'll mention them again, I'm sure, in other podcasts, and also on my site, on Instagram. It's Sky High and Fly Jump Camps. Once again, signing off. This is Troy Haynes and our special guest, Kayla Bushey, on Raise the Bar. Until next time, remember to keep raising that bar, both in your personal life and in your training and your competing. Until next time.